You know this saying, I put my foot in my mouth? Have you ever said anything that was just, well, to be honest, plain dumb, and then immediately afterward regretted it? You get this feeling that everyone around you is thinking, what the H-E double hockey sticks is wrong with you? Not that you judge yourself based on that, but it doesn't help when you realize that they realize that you put your foot in your mouth. I bet you can think of something, an instance where you have put your foot in your mouth. And I can think of a couple instances when I have done that too, but I'm not going to share those with you. You may just experience that one day for yourself if you haven't already, and if so, I'm sorry in advance. Instead, I'll share one of my favorites of how Wayne put his foot in his mouth with me. He knows I'm doing this. It was on our first date, and things I thought were going well. He seemed like a nice guy, until he decided to tell me a joke, which was not exactly to my taste. And I wondered what I was getting myself into. And I guess my face must have revealed it. I went silent, he went silent, awkward pause, first date scenario. Months later, he would tell me that he knew he had jeopardized his chance for another date. Don't ask us what the joke is. I can no longer remember it. I've blanked it on my memory. And he says he has too. I don't know. But we all have had moments when we wished we could put that toothpaste of words back in the tube, right? We squeezed it out too fast and we can't get it back inside there. We wish we could rewind the tape for just a few seconds. Maybe it was a hurtful word that we said to someone. Maybe it was an immediate yes to something when we should have said no. Maybe it was saying something to impress another person. And maybe we just spoke out of excitement and fear, and so we didn't think before we speak. I would like to imagine, at least for today, that is what Peter did. Peter put his foot in his mouth big time. And I'll get into that soon. But in case you missed it, this Lent, we are following Peter's journey as a disciple of Jesus. But more importantly, we'll see how Jesus walks with Peter as Peter falters, as Peter says the right thing and does the wrong thing. We are following them so that we might learn from Jesus about our own discipleship journey with Jesus. And we're pairing that with the song, Come Thou Fount. So last week we used the lyric, Jesus sought me as a stranger, right? This week it's rescue me from danger. And if you know the song, you can play it in your head and see where it fits in there. So last week, Jesus saw Peter as a stranger. We saw that in Luke. We saw Peter didn't even recognize who Jesus is at first. Jesus gets into Peter's boat. Jesus starts preaching like any other rabbi would preach, but he and his buddies are just tired. They don't even notice it. They just probably want to go home and sleep. Peter took no interest really in what Jesus was saying. But then Jesus tells him, go out deeper into the sea to fish. And Peter's like, who are you, carpenter's son? You don't know anything about fishing. But he does it. And he gets abundant fish. And when Peter finally recognizes who Jesus is, in his shame, he says, go away from me, Lord. But we learn that Jesus doesn't see his shame. Jesus doesn't see his failings. Jesus told Peter to come, follow me. And Jesus does that with us too. He does not hold us in places of shame or our failings. Jesus invites us to follow him, to love as he loves and serves as he serves. He calls us to grow in relationship with him. He seeks us as a stranger. Today we'll see that he rescues us from danger. We meet Peter and the other disciples in the middle of a storm all night by themselves. And I am sure that some of them are thinking that they are in this precarious situation because of Jesus. It's all Jesus' fault. Jesus is the one who told them to go to the other side at nighttime. And so once again, just like last week, Peter gets into his boat because Jesus told him to do so. But this time is a little different. This time, Peter has already seen Jesus at work in his ministry. But what's different is Jesus is not with them in the boat. After teaching and feeding 5,000 plus people with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, Jesus just needed some time alone. So he tells the disciples, you go over to the other side of the lake. I'm just going to go up to the mountaintop to pray to God, have some downtime. And it's already late and it's already dark and they can't see much. But they can feel the waves beating against the boat. They can feel themselves being tossed around all night. But that's not what scares them. What scares them is that something, someone, something is coming toward them. After all, it's the middle of the lake. It's nearly sunlight. Who else could it be but a ghost? Why? Because you don't usually expect to see someone walking towards you on top of water. Because they were already in a state of fear and stress due to the storm and the rough conditions of the lake. And when people are stressed or fearful, they're likely to interpret their events in a way that reflects their fear. So seeing something so unexpected and inexplicable as this figure coming towards them heightens their fear and leads them to the conclusion that it's a ghost. Plus the dim light and the shadows on the water could easily distort their perception, making them believe that it is something supernatural. Their ability to see Jesus in the middle of the night would have been severely limited. But on top of all that, Hebrew belief was that a body of water was often associated with chaos and danger. And it was common for people of the time to believe that there were supernatural beings living in the water. That's why in the creation story, God separates the waters from the above and below, showing that God has control over chaos. Put all those things together, no wonder they think it's a ghost. But Jesus hears them. Jesus knows that they're scared. Jesus knows what they're thinking. And he immediately says, no, it's not a ghost, it's me. He doesn't give them a name. But Peter knows who this entity is. And this is where Peter does it. This is where Peter puts his foot in his mouth. I told you I'd get to it. He says, on the next slide, please, Jubilee. He says, Lord, if it is, command me to come to you on the water. And the others are probably thinking, are you insane? What? Why? Did you notice nobody else is asking Jesus to call them out of the boat? But there always has to be that one person in the crowd, right? And Peter is it. What caused Peter to ask Jesus to tell him to come out of the boat, to command him to come out of the boat? Well, we've always thought about this as Peter having faith. And there is that. Peter does have faith. But why ask it in the first place? Was he asking Jesus to prove who he is? Jesus, if it is you, Lord, if it is you, command me, and then I'll know it's you. Or is he asking Jesus to show him that he can do exactly what Jesus is doing? This isn't Jesus testing Peter's faith. Peter is the one who put his foot in his mouth. Peter is the one who, in his tiredness or his excitement or whatever it is, spoke before thinking. And then when Jesus says, yeah, come on out, I wonder if Peter was thinking, oh crap, I wish I could take that back. I bet he did think that. But it could also be that Peter just really needed to prove to himself that Jesus was Jesus, and that he even wanted to experience that sensation of walking on water. All those things could be true at the same time. When Jesus calls Peter out of the boat, we have historically applauded that. If you grew up on this, we have said, yes, this is Peter showing great faith, stepping out of this boat, focusing on Jesus, trusting that Jesus would take care of him as he dares to try this new thing. And I have preached that too. Peter stepping out of the boat is a sign of great faith. But then we immediately lament his lack of faith because he steps out in faith, but then notices a strong wind, becomes frightened and sinks. And then we go, oh, Peter, why didn't you have faith, man? You stepped out of the boat in faith, and then you looked down at the water and you began to sink. How could you not have faith when just seconds before we applauded him for having faith? And then we applaud him again because as he's sinking, he knows he has to focus on Jesus. And so he calls out to Jesus, and Jesus reaches out his hand and he pulls Peter up. And we go, isn't that great? Peter had so much faith. Peter was sinking, and Peter called out to God. We should have faith like that. So does he have faith or not? He had faith to ask God, Jesus, to take him out of the boat. He stepped out of the boat. He had faith. He's begun to sink. He doesn't have faith. He called out to Jesus. He has faith. As I read and I reread this, I think that the point isn't that Peter had little faith because he could walk on water or not. I don't think that the lesson here is if you only have enough faith, you, a disciple of Jesus, could also walk on water just like me. I don't think that's the lesson. Peter is the one who put his foot in his mouth. Peter is the one who wanted to test that the Lord was the Lord. Peter is the one who commanded Jesus do that. Jesus did not ask Peter to do what Jesus did. Our takeaway from this should not be that if we have faith strong enough, we could do exactly what Jesus did, as we might have been taught. Jesus is Jesus. Jesus is God is incarnate, and we are reflections of that. We are not God. It is not as if only we had enough faith, we could be limitless, we could fly, we could walk on water, and how awesome would that be? I think the bigger point of this moment is that the disciples should have believed that Jesus was with them even when the storm was happening, because they did not believe it. They did not expect Jesus to show up. And we do that too. We tend to believe that if things are calm, if things are smooth, then God is present with us. But when things are not going smoothly, then God must be far away on a mountaintop somewhere. The disciples needed to have calm waters and easy passage to the other side to believe that God was present with them. Peter needed even more satisfying proof by asking Jesus to do what Jesus could do. I think this passage tells us that we often have the most experience of faith when things are going well, when something exceeds our expectation of what we can do, and when we have no struggle in life. When we're not being tossed about by the chaos of life, we can say, yes, God is with us. But when it's not going our way, we're not sure. Faith isn't whether we could step out of the boat or walk in water or sink or not. Faith is believing that God is walking towards us in that chaos, that God is always present and God has ultimate control over that chaos. Jesus says, take heart, it is I am here. Do not be afraid. When Peter called out to Jesus, remembering Jesus is there, Jesus reaches out his hand and helps Peter up. But what if Peter didn't call out to Jesus? Would Jesus not reach out his hand? The answer is obviously yes. Jesus would still reach out his hand. But acknowledging that God is present helps Peter too. When Jesus tells Peter, you of a little faith, why did you doubt? It's not so much about whether he could walk on water or not. It's about remembering that God is present at all times, in the chaos and in the calm, that God will walk towards us in that chaos. And why didn't they remember this? They had been there with Jesus, partnering with Jesus to feed the 5,000. They had seen Jesus able to speak parables that drew people to him. They had seen him cure a man on the Sabbath and cast out demons. And they had already seen him calm another storm in an earlier chapter of Matthew. But before we get too hasty and shaking our heads at them and saying, oh, you silly disciples, how could you have forgotten? We should acknowledge that we forget too. We tend to look for the next thing that shows us that God is present in our lives. We tend to forget that God already did what might have been impossible for us to do by ourselves, that God reconciles us to God. So many of us are disappointed with our faith journey because we have been taught that if we have enough faith, the impossible will happen. If we have enough faith, we will be healed. If we have enough faith, we will be rich. If we have enough faith, our journey will just be an easy one. But that was not even the experience of the first disciples. They didn't get rich. It wasn't easy for them. They were persecuted. But they were given the ability to do things through Christ because they believed that God was present. I think ultimately faith isn't about doing the things that Jesus did. We can't walk on water. We can't all heal, although I believe that occasionally that may happen. Faith is, as Hebrews 11 tells us, the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not yet seen. It is God who says God is who God is, and God will do what God promises to do, which is reconcile us to God. We don't have to try to be God. We don't have to try to walk on water. We need to remember that when life is tossing us about, God is not far off. And it's true that life seems to batter us all night long, and it's true that we're in the darkness, and it's true that sometimes it's difficult to see Jesus. But it's equally true that we can forget how good God is and the good God has done. And Jesus says, take heart, it is I am here, do not be afraid. So I think as disciples, Jesus can rescue us from danger by remembering that we don't have to prove our worthiness. We don't have to say, yes, we're going to step out of the boat. We don't have to put our foot in our mouth and try to do the impossible for God to prove that we are worthy of being a disciple of God.